John chapter 10, verse 1. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So Jesus again said to them, Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, he does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life, that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This charge I have received from my Father. There was again a division among the Jews because of these words. Many of them said, he has a demon and is insane. Why listen to him? Others said, these are not the words of one who is oppressed by a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind? God, once again, we ask that you help us as we read this passage. Help us to see truth in it. Help us to see you in it. God, help us to grow through our focus on this word for these minutes. Amen. So that last phrase in verse 21, can a demon open the eyes of the blind, connects this section with chapter 9, where there's the blind man and the light and the darkness and the blindness. It's caused a lot of discussion amongst the scholars about when this is actually taking place, but a lot think that it was part of that package in verse from chapter 9. Always have to remember that the chapter divisions and the verse numbers were not there in the original. They're there to help us to read the scriptures, but when the Apostle John was writing, it was one letter, one flow there. So just a point of interest there. The eyes of the blind, tying it back to chapter 9. Well, one foundational point for us to remember and consider as we go into this chapter is that spiritual formation informs and shapes every aspect of life. Our spiritual formation is essential. Our spiritual formation is critical because it impacts how we see the world, how we react to the world, how we live in our home, how we live in our hearts, how we live in the workplace. Our spiritual formation touches every aspect of our life, and commitment to bad spiritual formation well, that can lead to some bad practices and to bad understandings, commitment to bad spiritual formation, Pharisees, Greek or Roman philosophy, conforming to that formation, spiritual formation, will lead to some tragic consequences. But conforming towards the truth of Jesus, His Word, His apostles, His prophets, conforming in that way, that spiritual formation, well, that's the right way, according to Scripture. That's the right way to go. And it will, sure enough, have an impact on all of the areas of our life, including our understanding of current events and the times that we live in. So just a quick review there of spiritual formation being so very, very foundational. So Jesus comes and He uses this metaphor of the sheep and the sheepfold. Very interesting. To use. Jesus is using things that are practical in the world that they live in, that the people understood very well. He talks about entering the sheepfold by the door and the one who climbs in from another way. He says that he is coming through the door in the right way, is what he is saying. He comes through the door. And the door has certain credentials in order to enter this sheepfold. That doorway has certain credentials in order for passage to be allowed. And Jesus possesses the proper credentials, the Messianic credentials. We've already thought about the Messianic credentials last week and the week before, the Messianic credentials of Jesus, and of course the religious leaders are refusing that. But verse 2, but he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. So the gatekeeper's opening the door. The picture is the door is being opened and this shepherd is entering, and the only reason they can enter is because they have the right credentials. Many of you work in places, and the only reason the door is unlocked is because you have the right credentials on that magnetic strip on your badge that the door will open and you can go in. You have to have the right credentials. Jesus has the right Messianic credentials to enter into this sheepfold. He was born of the tribe of Judah. He's in the line of King David. He was born in Bethlehem. All these prophecies that were fulfilled. He was born of a virgin. He's greater than Moses. He comes on the scene and he's a very powerful miracle worker, a healer. He's light shining into darkness, Isaiah. And he has these credentials that no one else has ever had. So he has the right Messianic credentials, and that's what he's mentioning there. Now, this whole picture of a sheepfold is perhaps foreign to some of us. It wouldn't have been in that world, but some of us, it might be foreign to us. And the idea is the sheepfold is a protective area. We would say corral, a corral. A sheepfold is like a corral, and the sheep go into it, has walls around it, and it's a protective area. So the shepherds would bring their sheep into the sheepfold, and they would be protected at night. And these walls could be anywhere from 4 or 5 feet, but up to, some historians say, 8 to 10 feet tall. But these walls are protective because of a very hostile environment in the area of where Jesus is, Bethlehem and all that region, a very hostile. There's animals, there's wolves, but there's robbers. The area that I come from, they call them cattle rustlers. There's thieves that'll come in and take your cattle, and so they need to be protected. And so the sheep are brought in through this one door. They're brought into this one door, and then they're in this corral. They're in this sheepfold. And communities would have such a thing for the shepherds to bring their sheep to. And scattered throughout the nation in different areas where sheep were being raised, there would be different sheepfolds in different communities. But it's a communal sheepfold. And so these sheep are brought in here. And so I might have a flock of sheep. You might have a flock of sheep brought in there. You might have a flock of sheep brought in there. And you might have a flock of sheep brought in, but it's in this communal safe place. That's the picture. The sheep are in the sheepfold. And specifically, Jesus is talking about Israel at this point. He'll shift the metaphor in just a little bit, and that we understand that. In verse 15, he says, just as I have other sheep that are not of this fold. Well, if there's other sheep that are not of this fold, what is this one? This one is Israel. Jesus comes as Israel's Messiah, the message of Jesus coming to Israel first and then to the nations. So this sheepfold, specifically as this metaphor unfolds and begins, is the nation of Israel. There are robbers and thieves who have attempted to get over that wall. There are those that have come before him, religious leaders that have claimed to have the credentials necessary to represent God, and they don't. They're trying to get in and gain access coming in over the walls through another way other than the door, because the door has certain credentials. And Jesus says in verse 8, for example, all who came before me are thieves and robbers. Well, that should be understood to be all, as Moses wasn't a thief or a robber. Jeremiah, Isaiah was not a thief or a robber. John the Baptist wasn't a thief or a robber. But there were plenty of false religionists circulating, even within the temple of Israel itself, that were attempting to exploit the sheep, coming in by a way they didn't truly represent God. And so Jesus comes, and he's coming through with the right credentials. And as I say, this is a very interesting picture. And the metaphor, we could spend a lot of time really in our own reflection thinking about that metaphor and what it means for our spiritual life and what it means in connection to Jesus. These sheep coming in, people coming into this sheepfold. Jesus comes, he meets the Messianic credentials. He is the only one who meets those credentials. And he calls his sheep. He issues a call, and his sheep respond. Not all of the sheep respond to his voice. The elect of God respond to the voice of Jesus. As we see in the scriptures, many in Israel did not respond to Jesus, but some did. Matthew did. John did, the Apostle John. Some responded to Jesus. Jesus enters the sheepfold of the nation. His call goes out. We even sing that song by Charles Wesley, The Effectual Call. Wesley had it right, of course. The effectual voice, the effectual call. That call goes out and it takes effect in the heart of the individual. The theologians would call it the effectual call. The call goes out to all the nations. Everybody is intended to hear the announcement of Jesus, but it only takes root. It only captivates some, and some come, and that call has taken root, and that is effective in their life. So God's sheep, these certain sheep, they'll respond because they hear the call of the shepherd. Now, as I say, this is very interesting. I don't know a lot about sheep. I've been around sheep a little bit at a county fair or something like that, and I've known people that have raised sheep. But in my background, we raised cattle. When I was a boy, raised on a farm, a lot of cattle. We raised a lot of. So I understand some of what this. I can connect through this, and I understand something about non-domesticated animals. We had dogs too, and an old cat that I couldn't stand. Domesticated animals, but sheep are not domesticated. Cattle aren't domesticated animals, and I kind of understand how they work. And do you know, growing up on where I did, what my dad would do was actually very interesting to me now that I reflect on it through the scriptures. But he'd those cattle would be out there in a pasture in a fenced-in area. Go out, drive out in there, and he drove in a car, not a truck. We had a truck, but he rode his car. For some reason, he wanted to drive his car. Drive his car out there through all of those weeds and everything like that, through the pasture. And in the trunk, he had stopped and bought some cattle pellets. Some of you will know what that is, the pellets with the nutrients. And he'd drive up to where the cattle were, and they'd be there, and he'd sprinkle out those pellets. And they'd come up there. We'd drive away, and they'd come up there, maybe put a salt block out there too, and they'd come up and lick the mineral block, salt block. They'd come up there and they'd eat those pellets. Well, before long, it didn't take many days, and they knew when that yellow car of his, that yellow Impala, when it came through the field, they knew what was in the trunk of that car. Here came, he didn't have to do anything, but he would honk the horn. Doo, doo, doo. Here they come. They come, we'd get out, I'd get out, and shake out some pellets. Here they are. We'd have great big, long line from here to the street. Long line of cattle eating pellets. They understood the voice. So when Jesus said, the sheepfold, I can get a picture of that. And they hear the voice of the shepherd. I can understand that because they won't come with the truck, the horn of the truck. They just continue to graze out there and do what they do. But that special horn on that Impala, they knew that sound of that one, and here they would come. So Jesus says, he comes, he has these right credentials, and when he comes in, enters through the door of the sheepfold, he announces, he speaks, and they hear his voice and they respond to it. And these Pharisees especially, and the others that are in the camp of the Pharisees, the religion of Israel, they don't hear the voice. They're not connected. They don't know the voice. They don't come to Jesus. They reject Jesus. So these particular sheep will respond to that particular call. Truly I say to you, he who does not enter by the sheepfold, by the door, but climbs in another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. They hear the voice. So they hear that voice. Now it's an interesting thing about these sheep, probably not too different from cattle, but that they're familiar with that voice. And the sheep will flee a strange voice. The natural instinct of an animal, well, not every animal universally, but generally, if it's a strange voice, a strange person, they'll flee. They're skittish. They'll flee from that voice. The sheep they'll flee at strange voices, but they come to those familiar voices because that's where safety is. That's where nutrition is. That's where comfort is. Mainly, I can be safe there. I can come to that place. But when the strange voice comes, they'll run or they'll flee. Because it's a voice that they're not afraid of, and the natural instinct is to be fearful of that. But if they have that strange voice, and just as they learned this other voice from the horn of the Impala, if they hear this other voice enough, they'll come to that. They'll come to that voice. But initially, they're very fearful. They'll flee. Verse 7, Jesus again said to them, Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. So Jesus is taking this picture that everybody knew. And I think it's so interesting that all the sheep were in the sheepfold together. But that would be okay, I guess. In the area I come from, everybody tags their cattle, and they have the cutting horses, the quarter horses. They'll cut them out, and it's not a problem because everybody's tagged, but we don't read of them being tagged here. They know the voice. Although in God's mind they are tagged. We have this picture, 3 of them actually, in the lobby. I am the good shepherd. I don't know if you've noticed, when you go out today, take a notice. Those sheep have a marking on the back. They're marked. God knows who those sheep are. He knows. He knows that they're all communally into this area together. But they hear, they're sensitive to that voice. Jesus takes this metaphor, this picture, he shifts it a little bit. Now, here's what he's doing here in the 7th verse. He shifts it. It's still the sheepfold, but the idea is the shepherd has called out his sheep. Now he's out here in a pasture somewhere. Can't come back and forth every day. On this particular day, he's built a little sheepfold himself for at night so the wolves and wild animals won't come in and get the sheep. He's built one here. And what the gatekeepers did is they would actually, when they got the sheep in here, that shepherd would actually lay across the entry of that door. They'd lay down. So if any animal or a robber or something wants to come in and steal something or get something, have to come over the shepherd, have to go right over the shepherd, go right through the shepherd. How does that make you feel about being one of God's sheep? They're going to have to come through Jesus to get you. That's what that means. They're going to have to come through Jesus. That shepherd would lay down at the door. And that's true. When Lydia and I were in Kenya, some places in the world they still do this. They call these things a boma. And or some of you know what thorn bushes are. Some of us have had personal experience with thorn bushes. Big old thorns. Not a rose bush thorn, a big one. They collect these things and build them into, again, what we would call a corral. But where they're living, their home, their little huts. And they build this thing at least as bigger as this property. Or at least about 2/3 of this property. Build it, have these thorn bushes all around it. And so at night, guess where the animals come? They come in, and those animals that they live with, that's those people's savings account. That's their life, is those animals. Those animals are with those people in that boma. Anything that's going to come and get those animals, or get anyone in the family, going to have to come over a thorn bush, or come through the gate. There is a gate. Still do this today. Today, they're doing it. The shepherd, Jesus takes a metaphor, lays down. So now he says, I am the door. I am the door. First, it's like he's entering through the right qualifications, but this way, all who came before me are sheep, or thieves and robbers. The sheep didn't listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he'll be saved. And he go in and out and find pasture. Well, these sheep, as I've mentioned, the natural instinct is to flee a strange voice. For a sheep, it's worthy of great meditation at this point. An animal, over time, learns the sound of that voice. And by the way, some of the shepherds would even play we might say a recorder or some kind of a flute. They'd know that sound. And a different shepherd would have George would have a different flute. I'd have a different flute. Mike would have a different flute. And so George's sheep would go to that. Mine would go with me, and they'd be separated like that. Over time, the animal learns the sound, and they're attracted and they're drawn to it. You already beat me, didn't you? You already know where I'm going with that. You listen long enough and intently enough to a false voice, a voice that's trying to really draw you away from Jesus, you'll follow. You will follow. You become familiar. And you're taken in that direction. It sounds good. It sounds pleasing. You think you can have safety there. It seems like the right thing to do. A thief and a robber has trained you to like their sound. Well, these sheep are deeply, of course, familiar with these sounds. And the shepherd, the under-shepherds, are called to make sure that the sheep can distinguish the sound that is safe for the sheep. See, as an act of protective care, an under-shepherd, someone that would be working for that shepherd, the under-shepherd must diligently ensure that the sheep know the sound, the voice of the shepherd. The under-shepherd doesn't play his own flute, not supposed to. He plays the flute, the sound, makes the sound of the shepherd, so that the sheep will understand. They will be able to they will intimately and they'll very clearly be able to distinguish the voice of the good shepherd. They'll be able to clearly understand that. But oh, do we live in a time? Do we live in a time? It seems like that when you get in certain groupings of people, what that group of people is very familiar with is the sound of a Republican. Or if they're in another group, they're very familiar with the sound of a Democrat. They're very familiar with the sound of a socialist or a communist. And we all can think about those, but now that I've pointed you there, come back. The shepherd's voice is supposed to be what's being announced. You are supposed to be announcing the shepherd's voice. Under shepherds, God's people are mixed with all kinds of sheep in the world. How are they going to know the shepherd's voice when the shepherd warns them if they never hear it? They're getting seduced by Fox News. They're getting seduced by MSNBC. They're getting seduced on Facebook and in CNN. They're getting seduced. You are getting seduced every day. So the best thing you can do for someone that you love as an under-shepherd, speak to them about Jesus. Help them to understand the voice of Jesus, whoever shows up in front of you. God has ordained that person to be there. Say something that helps them distinguish that sound, or they are going to be slaughtered. That's the world you live in. Oh, yeah. I don't like that group over there because they don't blow that whistle. They don't play that flute. I mean, they're not playing the flute of the great shepherd. Why? We'll see in a little bit. This is the world you live in. Jesus is warning. There are some that want to come over the walls, and they want to slaughter your soul. I don't know how I can make it any more clear. They want to slaughter your soul. You know, where I grew up, cattle rustlers weren't thought of very highly, of course. And, you know, a cattle rustler doesn't come in and say, oh, I'm going to take you to market. You're going to get slaughtered. We're going to eat you. That's what we're going to. Come here, baby. Come here, baby. Here. You want an apple? You want an apple? You're going to get slaughtered. Is that the voice of Jesus? Is that the voice of the great shepherd, of the great I am? You need to be alert. This is a passage causing people to be alert. God's people are intended to make people be alert. Not uninformed about the world that they live in, but alert. Much more sensitive to the great shepherd than the would-be's. Well, the shepherd, one thing about that shepherd, what makes the shepherd great is the shepherd has the perfect well-being of the sheep in mind. The way he puts it here is that they'll go in, verse 9, if anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. That's blessing. That's your well-being. These are the words of Jesus. I am the door. Anyone who enters by me will be saved through Jesus. And they'll come in and out, and they'll find pasture. It means that sheep will find freedom. That sheep will find spiritual abundance within the boundaries that God set up, of course. A lot of people think about freedom. They can do anything they want to. No, within God's boundaries. Freedom. And abundance. Pasture. That's what. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. So it's spiritual freedom. Spiritual abundance, which is true freedom, which is true abundance. Being set free from religious bondage, which may be rules and rituals from without, or may be guilt and burdens from within. Set free. Spiritually set free so that you can move in that. You can live your life. And Jesus is there, the protector of your soul. And you'll find abundance. I came that they would have life. Verse 10. The thief comes only to steal and to kill and destroy. I came that they would have life and have it abundantly. That's a promise. Not from the church. The church announces it. Not from the preacher. But from the Lord. Try it. Abundance. Spiritual abundance. Contentment. Satisfaction. A sense of confidence that your shepherd is really going to take care of you. On this earth and in the life to come, in eternity, in heaven. But He's going to take care of you in a different way than you surely would have expected, but going to take care of you nonetheless. There's that's abundance to be taken care of in the ways that really matter. They're free to come in and out. So there's joy and there's an assurance about your future. Spiritual satisfaction. It can't come from anywhere else. Spiritual satisfaction, which radiates out, spiritual formation we began with today, it radiates out. Spiritual satisfaction boils up and comes out into other areas of our life, as discomforting and as uneasy as those situations may very well be, comes up, and it's the only place that is available is through the Good Shepherd. Sheep are under the care of the Good Shepherd, and they do experience this freedom. Well, what about these thieves and these robbers? The words are interesting because they carry a nuance. Thieves, in a word, we would say they used stealth. They used deception. They mislead in a kindly way. But a robber will hold someone up at gunpoint. They'll use aggression. They'll use force. The warning is that those who are trying to get in, those are trying to get into your soul. Those that are trying to get in, some will use stealth. Very sweet. A thief. And some will come with great force. And they'll use that force to coerce and to push and to capture. So these are illegitimate spiritual leaders. Jesus is the legitimate one. And it starts out with the picture in the sheepfold of Israel and what the religious leaders are doing to the people of Israel, casting all of these burdens on the people of Israel, and they're imprisoning them, and they're trying to capture them. And the great shepherd comes and he announces his voice, and some will respond to it. But these illegitimate ones, they're coming in and they're trying to capture these sheep, take some for themselves, and they're acting and they're coming into the sheepfold into ways that are apart from. They're opposed to actually Jesus. These people that Jesus is speaking against, most directly the Pharisees, again connected to chapter 9, speaking against them, they're actually opposed to the great shepherd. They're opposed. These illegitimate people, the illegitimate spiritual leaders, spiritual influencers in your life. A lot of people trying to do that, whether they go into the name of religion or spiritual or not, they're still trying to get access to your soul. They're coming in by stealth, by aggression, but they're doing it apart from the Lord Jesus. Red light. Where is Jesus in all of this discussion? Does anything resemble Jesus in this discussion, whatever the discussion it would be? Of course, Jesus is in the Scriptures. I mean, just in your daily walk. And those that are trying to distract you, take you in other directions, turn you away from the truth, minimize the truth. Well, that's what these thieves and robbers do. It's only the Bible. It's only Jesus. But now the more important issue is this one over here. Really? Jesus is really the most important issue. Not just the most religious issue and the most important issue as far as faith. He is the most, well, he has authority to lay down his life and take it up again. That gives him authority. And we'll look more closely at that next week. But the reason we can say he owns us is because he laid down his life and purchased us. He purchased you. That's why he has authority. But these thieves and these robbers, they try to minimize the word of Jesus. They try to sweet talk the people of Jesus. Trying to distract the people of Jesus. They know the sound that sheep wants to hear. They know the sound that sheep, they don't want to hear that one. They don't want to hear that. They know that sheep has an itch. And they know how to scratch it. They're going to scratch that itch and distract you from what really matters. Yeah, those thieves and the robbers, they come in and they know they know the itch. And what is the itch? Well, we can say what you want to hear, and that'd be pretty close to right. The itch is to be confirmed in what you already believe. Now, that's okay if it lines up with Scripture. But if it don't line up with Scripture, if it don't line up with Jesus, the itch, you want to hear something that conforms to what you already believe. And you can be very comfortable with that. I mean, you've been immersed into it, the false thieves and the robbers all week anyway. And so you're very comfortable with that, and you really itch because that's what you want to hear and get all over. And if you just say something about that, well, that'd be all right. But don't tell me nothing that I don't want to hear. The thieves and the robbers are smarter than that. They're smarter than that. Leave you with a passage out of 2 Timothy chapter 4. The Apostle Paul writing to Timothy. Chapter 4, verse 1. I charge you in the presence of God and of Jesus Christ, who is to judge the living and the dead, and by his appearing and his kingdom, preach the word. Be ready in season and out of season. Reprove, rebuke, and exhort. With complete patience and teaching. For a time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, but having itching ears, they will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions, and will turn away from listening to the truth and wander off into myths, one step at a time, inch by inch. Anything's a cinch. As for you, always be sober-minded, endure suffering, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry. It's a call for all of us. Whoever God has put in front of us, do that work. Do that work of familiarizing people with the voice of the Good Shepherd. They're getting familiar enough with the other voices. You don't need to remind them of that. Thieves and the robbers are taking care of that. They need to be reminded of the voice, the flute,
of the Good Shepherd.